The day was August 24th, a day Ayomide had waited for all her life. It was her wedding day. Ayomide was over the moon with joy. She was marrying the love of her life. The wedding was perfect. The music, the food, the guests, everything was magical. But unknown to Ayomide, her fairy tale night was going to turn into a nightmare very, very quickly. She was marrying into one of the wealthiest families in Lagos, and her mother had warned her about rich families and their traditions. But she never imagined anything this evil. Their delicacies were old money, and their old money came with old secrets. Secrets that Ayomide was about to discover. The night of her lavish wedding had started with celebrations. Ayomide and Femi danced their first dance as husband and wife. The hall was filled with music, laughter, and flashing cameras. Ayomide was happy and smiling from ear to ear. It was a long day, but it was worth it. Ayomide was looking forward to a night of love with her new husband. She giggled at the thought of spending the night in his arms. This was a night she would never forget. After the wedding party, she and Femi were the first to leave. As they stepped outside, a limousine was waiting to take them home as the guests waved at them, wishing them a happy married life. She and Femi rushed into the limo, smiling at the guests and looking into each other's eyes with love. The limo took off as everybody waved at them. When they arrived at the family mansion, Femi took her to their quarters. Ayomide looked around at the opulence and the wealth around her. So this is what her life would look like from now on. Wealth, riches, servants, and her amazing husband Femi. It was too good to be true. It was her dream come true. As she made to take off her wedding clothes, Femi held her hand tightly, telling her to leave it on. But I feel stuffy, Femi. I want to change into something lighter. No, leave it on, he said. And something about the tone of his voice seemed off. He sounded annoyed, like she had done something wrong. There's a family dinner tonight, and you need to have your wedding dress on for it. Wedding dress for family dinner? But it's so late, Femi. And I'm not hungry. This is our wedding night, and we need to spend it together. No problem, my love. We will spend it together, but we need to do this first. Let me check if everything is ready. And with that, Femi stepped out of the room, leaving Ayomide even more confused. Ayomide sat down on the bed, deep in thought. This was her wedding night, so she was not going to allow anything spoil it. As she sat down on the bed, she started thinking about how all of this had begun. She had always dreamed of a fairy tale wedding. And when she met Femi, a rich and handsome businessman, she thought she had found her prince. His family, the Adelekes, were one of the wealthiest in Lagos. Old money, the kind of money that made people whisper. But Ayomide didn't care about their wealth. She loved Femi, and Femi loved her. And for her, that was all that mattered. She knew that people were whispering that she was marrying him for his money. But she and Femi knew that this was not true. They were in love. Ayomide shifted on the bed as she remembered that initially, Femi had seemed reluctant to propose marriage to her. He kept saying there were things he had to deal with and that his family was not the easiest family to marry into. In fact, both his brothers and even his sisters were all married. So Ayomide found it strange that Femi was still single. But because she loved him, she ignored all the signs and she stuck with him. And when she had asked him for the third month in a row where their relationship was going, Femi finally gave in and asked her to marry him. He asked her if she was sure she could cope with his family, and she said yes. That was the first time he took her to introduce her to his family. They were very nice to her, and she didn't understand what Femi meant that they were difficult. His mother hugged her and welcomed her to the family, while his father nodded in agreement. She liked them. And everything was going well that day, until they were invited to the dining table and the rest of the family joined in. First off, she was surprised that all their children and their spouses lived in the same house. Yes, it was a mighty mansion with various quarters, but did they all have to live together? She would have to talk to Femi about that because she wanted her own place. She wanted privacy. The second thing she noticed was that the wives of Femi's brothers kept looking at her with something that looked like pity in their eyes. Or was it fear? Ayomide could not tell, and she didn't have the chance to talk to any of them privately. On the surface, everything seemed happy, but she could not deny that there was an undertone of something she could not explain. But Ayomide was too happy to be bothered. Here she was, having dinner with the family of her future husband. What could go wrong? Their wedding was a grand event at a classy destination. Top politicians, business moguls, and celebrities attended. Everything was perfect. The wedding reception was extravagant. Gold chandeliers, a band playing live music, and a feast that could feed a village, and guests toasted to the happy couple. She smiled in her thoughts, but just then she heard the words, "Dinner is ready." Femi's voice jolted her from her daydreaming. "Okay, I'm coming," Ayomide said, standing up to follow Femi. It was almost 10 p.m., so she did not understand why the dinner had to happen tonight. But this was her wedding night, and she was not going to let anything steal her joy. She would rush through the dinner so that she and Femi could retire for the night. She was just too eager to consummate their wedding. As they approached the dining table, she noticed that every family member was at the dinner table, including a few more she didn't know. They were introduced as Femi's uncles and aunties, and Ayomide greeted them warmly. They greeted her back with a weird smile on their faces. Dinner was lovely, and everyone was talking about the wedding and the guests that attended while they ate. This is not bad, Ayomide thought to herself, looking round the table at her new family. But then, just at the dot of 11 p.m., Chief Adeleke, Femi's father, stood up and clinked his glass, calling for everyone's attention. The room fell silent. "We welcome Ayomide to the Adeleke family," he said. "The real ceremony begins now to complete your arrival into this family," he announced, smiling towards Ayomide, but there was no warmth in his eyes. Ayomide frowned, turning to Femi. "Real ceremony? What does that mean?" Femi patted her hand. "Just trust me and do everything they say, and you will be fine." Everybody stood up, and Chief Adeleke told everyone to move in a certain direction. He gestured to a set of doors at the end of the hall. There were 2 hefty guards standing by the door. These 2 guards opened the doors, revealing a long white staircase leading down. Ayomide hesitated. "Where are we going?" Chief Adeleke's voice was calm. "To perform your welcome ceremony, we need to play a game." "A game?" Ayomide thought. Okay, she would play their game so that she can retire with her husband for the night. Everyone filed downstairs, and Ayomide noticed that the doors were shut behind them, and she thinks she heard the keys being locked. Downstairs was a big, beautiful game room with all sorts of games. Board games, throwing games, card games, skipping games, you name it, and it was there. Ayomide was invited to choose a game so that they could play. And because she was so tired, she decided to choose the easiest game. So she picked up a pack of cards and handed it to her father-in-law. "Nice choice," he said. Chief Adeleke shuffled the cards, and then he stepped forward and said to Ayomide, "Choose one." The room was silent, with everyone looking at her. Ayomide reached out and picked one card. "Read the name on the card," Chief Adeleke said. Ayomide turned it over, and there was a name on the card. It was Babatunde Adeleke. She turned it so that everyone could see, and immediately she noticed the fear on their faces. She glanced up at her father-in-law, hoping for an explanation. "Who is Babatunde Adeleke? I thought this was just a game of cards." Chief Adeleke's expression darkened. "He is my late grandfather," he said, "and tonight, since you have chosen him, he will claim you as his bride." Ayomide's stomach turned. "That's impossible," she stammered. He's dead. And moreover, I am the bride to Femi." She turned to Femi, but Femi turned away and looked in the opposite direction. He could not look her in the face. "What is this, Femi? What is going on?" she asked. "Just do what they say," Femi said. His voice was low, and he was not even looking at her. Her heart pounded. "This is a joke, right?" "No, it is not a joke," Chief Adeleke said. "Death is not the end in our family. It is a doorway. And for you to be accepted into this family, you must complete this ceremony. It is our tradition." She turned to Femi. "Femi," she whispered, "please help me." But he just stood there, frozen, as if he wasn't allowed to interfere. Chief Adeleke gestured to the women in the room. "Prepare her," he commanded. The women, including the wives of Femi's brothers, stepped forward, grabbing Ayomide by the arms. She tried to resist, but their grip was like iron. "No," she screamed. "This is crazy. Let me go." The women ignored her protest, dragging her towards a stone altar at the far end of the room. Ayomide had not even noticed it before. On the altar lay a set of ancient-looking robes. "Dress her up," Femi's mother said. Ayomide struggled, but there were too many hands holding her down. As they forced the ceremonial robes onto her, she felt her strength slipping away. They forced her to kneel down right by the altar, with two of the women still holding her down. Chief Adeleke raised his hands. The room fell silent, and then he began to chant. The chants grew louder and louder, and everyone else was muttering something under their breath while Ayomide looked around, worried. The ground under them began to tremble, and suddenly the air in the room started to shift. At that moment, it seemed as if something had entered the room. All of a sudden, the women let go of her and stepped back. "Babatunde, she is yours," Chief Adeleke said, bowing low to no one in particular. Ayomide was scared. She felt some cold wind on her back. And then she felt it. Someone was standing right behind her. Ayomide turned her eyes to Femi again, desperation in her eyes. "Say something, Femi. Help me." But Femi only lowered his head. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. At that moment, a deep voice echoed through the chamber, coming from nowhere and everywhere at once. "She is mine. She is mine." Then, without warning, she felt herself being lifted off her feet. An unseen force slammed her on top of the altar, pinning her down. She struggled against the invisible grip that was holding her, screaming, "Let me go! Let me go! Let me go!" The dead Babatunde Adeleke had awakened, and he had come for their bride. Suddenly, a voice shouted, "Let her go!" It was Femi's voice. It was the first time Femi had spoken up. He stepped forward, annoyed and glaring at his father. "This isn't how it's supposed to go," he muttered, looking towards his father. "You said the ritual was only symbolic." Chief Adeleke didn't flinch. "It is not symbolic, my son. It is destiny." "No, this isn't right," Femi shouted at his father. "This wasn't supposed to happen this way." Chief Adeleke remained calm. "It is happening exactly as it should. Please, do not interfere again." Chief Adeleke ordered everyone to close their eyes for a new set of chants, to recall Babatunde since Femi's rant had interrupted the ceremony. Ayomide's eyes were wide open, while the two ladies holding her down also had their eyes closed like everyone else in the room, making the chant that Ayomide did not understand. That was when something strange happened. The lady holding her down on the right leaned close to her and whispered something in her ears. "If you grab that statue over there," she said, gesturing towards a statue near Chief Adeleke, "and you escape before the ritual is complete at midnight, Babatunde will destroy them and you will be safe. There is a door behind us. Use it." And just as suddenly as she continued chanting as if she had said nothing, Ayomide's eyes quickly moved to see who had whispered to her. It was Abeni, Femi's sister-in-law. She nodded at Ayomide and quickly closed her eyes before anyone noticed that she was communicating with Ayomide. Ayomide barely had a moment to process the words before Abeni's fingers brushed against hers, pressing something cold and metallic into her palm. It was a small blade, a lifeline. She was not even sure whether she could trust Abeni, but she had no choice. She had to trust her. Her pulse raced as she looked around the room, planning her escape. She had one chance, but she knew that if she ruined it, it would be disastrous. But she had to try. She was not about to let any spirit sleep with her on her wedding night. They were still chanting. She glanced towards Femi, and he too had his eyes closed, chanting quietly. The shrine started to tremble as the final phase of the ritual began. Chief Adeleke raised his hands, his voice deep and commanding. "Babatunde, come forth and claim your bride." Suddenly, a cold wind swept across the room. A cold grip locked around Ayomide's ribs, pressing her. She could feel him. She could feel it. Her vision started to blur. She noticed the entire Adeleke family chanting frantically, eager to come to the end of the ritual and for Babatunde to finally possess her. The women holding her had left her alone since this was the final few minutes of the ritual. Ayomide knew this was the time to make her move. With everyone's eyes closed, she quickly pulled her hands out, threw herself forward, breaking the sacred cycle that was drawn around the altar. She quickly ran to grab the statue that Abeni had told her to grab before anyone could react. As soon as she grabbed it, everyone froze, horrified as they looked at her in horror. "Drop that statue," Chief Adeleke said quietly. "No, I am going to break it if anybody moves. Stay where you are," she said as she started backing towards the back door that Abeni had told her about. Gasp echoed through the room. Horrified eyes turned towards her. Then she screamed, "Babatunde Adeleke! Babatunde Adeleke! Babatunde Adeleke!" calling his name 3 times, and then she quickly ran to the back door, opened it, and started running. The back door led into a large basement with many doors. Ayomide ran as fast as she could, but she did not know the house very well, and she was not sure which door would lead her outside. Meanwhile, inside the room, chaos erupted. The spirit of Babatunde Adeleke was howling fiercely, breaking things in the room. The entire Adeleke clan was in shambles. Nobody had ever escaped this ceremony before, and Chief Adeleke knew that if Ayomide was not found and brought back, it would be disastrous for his family. The chief's voice was the first to break through. "Stop her! Stop her now!" Everybody suddenly woke up, grabbing weapons from the room and running through the door to find Ayomide. Ayomide's progress was slow. She seemed to be going in a circle. She got to the end of the hall and she was not sure whether to go right or left. But when she heard the Adeleke family pursuing her, she quickly went right. Unfortunately, right was a dead end. but it was too dangerous to come back, so she quickly ducked into the nearest room and hid in a corner, hoping that no one would find her. Meanwhile, the family divided themselves into different search groups. Femi was paired with his sister-in-law, and they went in the direction that Ayomide had gone. As they entered the room where Ayomide was hiding, Femi saw her in the corner and pretended to hit something over, pretending to cut himself. "Oh my God, are you hurt?" his sister-in-law said. "Yes," Femi said. "Please go and get the first aid kit." When she left, Femi quickly closed the door and walked towards Ayomide. "I know you are there, Ayomide. I can see you, and I want to help you escape." Ayomide slowly came out, and Femi hugged her. "I am so sorry, Ayomide. I am very sorry. I told you my family is crazy." He quickly told her to hide behind him so he could lead her to the back door where she can run away before any of his family members find her. Ayomide was glad that Femi was on her side. How could she doubt him? He was probably scared of his family as well. Femi and Ayomide crept through the halls, with Femi assuring her that he was going to show her a back door to escape. He told her to walk to the end of the field and then take a right turn, and that would bring her to the road where she could flag down a car. Ayomide nodded frantically, eager to get out of this cursed house. But just as they turned the corner, something strange happened. Femi suddenly leapt forward, grabbing Ayomide's arm in a tight grip. His face, once filled with love and assurance, was now hardened. "Ayomide, don't you see what you're doing?" His voice cracked. "You have doomed us all. I can't let you destroy my family." Ayomide struggled with him. "Let me go, Femi. Let me go. What are you doing?" But he held on tighter. "No, I won't let you go." And then all of a sudden, Femi screamed, "She's here! She's here!" The rest of his family came towards them and dragged Ayomide back to the shrine, while she kicked and pulled, but nobody paid any attention to her. She was dragged back to the altar, and this time they ensured that she was tied with a rope, and then they restarted the chanting again. They had just 10 minutes before midnight, and they were eager to complete the ritual by midnight, or else something disastrous might happen to the family. Unknown to them, Ayomide still had the blade that Abeni had given to her. So, as they were chanting, she quietly reached into her pocket, grabbed the blade, and started cutting the ropes that was tying her hands. Nobody paid any attention to her. As far as they were concerned, she was securely tied, and this time, they must finish the ritual. Ayomide walked fast, but the rope was thick, so it was taking too long to cut, and she suspected that the chanting would soon finish because she started to feel that cold wind again. She was praying under her breath, "God help me. God, please help me." And as if God heard her prayer, the rope suddenly cut. And without thinking, she quickly stood up, grabbed that statue again, and broke it on the floor. Immediately, the shrine began to shake violently. The floor too was shaking. All their delegates were staring at the broken statue with fear in their eyes, while Ayomide stared at them as well. Suddenly, their delegates all looked past her, as if there was something behind her. Then, a low, deep voice boomed loud. "You broke the bond. You must pay. You must all pay." And suddenly, there was a strong wind in the room, blowing everything, and everyone was running for cover. One of the women in the room was suddenly lifted off her feet, her body twisting unnaturally. There was a loud crack as if her neck had been broken. Her lifeless body dropped to the ground. Everybody screamed. The Adeleke family, so powerful, so feared, were now scrambling everywhere like trapped animals. Femi grabbed Ayomide by both shoulders, desperation in his eyes. "We have to finish the ritual." Ayomide's stomach twisted. Even now, as his family was being destroyed, he was still choosing them. She shook her head. "No, Femi. No, I cannot." And that was when he made his choice. His hands tightened around her throat. Femi started to choke Ayomide. Ayomide gasped, trying to remove his hands from her neck, but Femi pressed even harder. Behind Femi, the shadows were closing in. Babatunde's spirit had started to descend upon the remaining Adelekes one by one. A deep scream filled the air as Femi's mother was yanked backwards, the spirit throwing her violently against the wall. Femi continued to choke Ayomide. Ayomide's vision started to blur and she started to lose consciousness. But then she thought to herself, "No, I will not die here. Not today. Not like this." So, with every last strength left in her, she drove her knee up, slamming into Femi's stomach. Femi gasped and stumbled, and in that split second, she broke free. And she ran. She quickly went up the stairs by which they had come in, praying frantically that the doors would open. And luckily for her, when she grabbed the door handle, it opened. She didn't look back. She ran. She ran fast. The house was falling apart around her. Beams were crashing to the ground. But Ayomide did not care. She ran until she reached the door. But just as she reached the door, she heard her name. "Ayomide." She turned round quickly. Femi was right behind her, his eyes wide with terror. Behind him, a strong wind was pulling him in. He looked at Ayomide with fear in his eyes. "Help me. Help me, please." Ayomide's heart pounded. For a moment, she hesitated. She reached out to grab him. But then, she remembered. Femi had tricked her. He had called for them to take her back to the shrine. He had tried to kill her. Ayomide took a step back. "Ayomide, please." His voice was breaking. He was being pulled in by the strong wind. But Ayomide only whispered one thing. "Goodbye, Femi." And then she turned and she ran. She opened the door and ran into the night. The night air hit her like a slap, but she didn't mind. She kept running. Through the trees, through the darkness, through the screams that she could hear behind her. She didn't look back. She didn't want to. She wanted to get far away from the Adelekes as she could. She ran until she came to the end of the field and turned into the main road. She collapsed onto the road, her chest beating loudly, the scent of freedom filling her nostrils. She was alive. She was alive. The weight of everything she had been through hit her all at once. She had escaped. God. She thought about it. The horror of the ritual. The feel of Femi's hands around her throat. The screams. Dear God, the screams. They were gone. Every single one of them. She should have felt victorious. But all she felt was emptiness. Days passed, then weeks, and slowly Ayomide began to piece herself back together. She moved to a different town, somewhere far from the Adelekes, far from anyone remotely connected to the Adelekes. She found a small apartment. She found a job. She learned to smile again. But at night, the nightmares would come. She would wake up screaming, her heart pounding, feeling Femi's hands around her neck, hearing the crack of bones, the whisper of Babatunde in the dark. Some scars just never faded. One evening, as she walked home from work, something stopped her. A familiar figure stood by a fruit stall, her head wrapped in a bright red scarf, her face turned slightly away. She glanced in Ayomide's direction. Ayomide's breath caught in her throat. It couldn't be. How could it be? The woman turned and their eyes met. It was Abeni, Femi's sister-in-law, the one who had told her to escape. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Abeni gave Ayomide a nod, a silent confirmation. She had survived. Ayomide felt her throat tighten. She walked towards Abeni, uncertain, but Abeni only offered a small, knowing smile. And for the first time in weeks, Ayomide smiled back. Back in Lagos, the once mighty Adeleke family was gone. Their mighty estate, once filled with wealth, power, and dark secrets, now stood empty. The walls, once immaculate, were now covered in dust and decay. The great dining hall, where they had feasted and had been taken over by rats. The grand shrine, where they had summoned Babatunde, now lay in ruins. No one spoke of them. Their name, once feared, was now forgotten. They had gambled with the dark forces for generations, believing themselves to be untouchable. But in the end, their own power had destroyed them. They had messed with the wrong bride. And as for Ayomide, she was free. She was forever changed, but she was free. Ayomide's experience teaches us that blind loyalty can be deadly. Femi's devotion to his family's dark traditions ultimately led to his downfall, proving that not all bonds should be honored. Strength isn't just about fighting, it's about knowing when to walk away. Even when Femi begged her for help, Ayomide realized that saving herself meant leaving behind those who refused to change. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know if you enjoyed this story by leaving a like and a comment. See you in the next story.